Hey guys, today I'm going to take you somewhere unexpected. You're standing at the base of Mount Olympus, but it doesn't feel like just a mountain. The wind rushes through the pine trees with unnatural rhythm, and the stars above don't twinkle, they shiver subtly, as if caught in some ancient, invisible grid. You've heard the stories, the myths, the gods, but what if I told you Mount Olympus was never a spiritual realm? What if it wasn't natural at all? Tonight, we're going to explore the very real possibility that Olympus was a constructed alien-based camouflage, ed with myth, wrapped in metaphor, and hidden right in plain sight. Careful, Fabi, the end. You might never see history the same way again. So, before we descend into this strange story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe a bit. Only if ancient secrets and cosmic questions are your thing. Drop your current location and time in the comments. You want to know where on Earth or beyond you're watching from. Now, take a breath, clear your mind, and let's unlock the myths that may never have been myths at all. The soil beneath your feet crunches as you begin your ascent, but it feels wrong, not just rocky, but layered like sheets of compacted material with odd, repeating patterns. Rock shouldn't do that. And here's the first twist. Geologists still argue over how Mount Olympus formed. It's part of a fault-block mountain range, but it rises too sharply, too symmetrically. Some rock formations there seem almost modular, carved, disconnected from their surrounding geology. Mainstream history says Olympus became sacred because of its imposing height, but fringe theorists flip that logic. Maybe it was built tall to be seen from the stars. Because here's the thing, Olympus was described not just as tall, but impossible to reach. Not in elevation, but in access. Myths often say mortals could not climb it or clouds hid its peak forever. Sound familiar? That's how we describe classified zones. Mountaintops obscured by thick, persistent cloud cover. Thunder that rumbles when the weather doesn't call for it. Glows at night mistaken for starlight but too close, too intentional. You recall Homer's line, Olympus, where no wind shakes the trees nor snow falls. Poetic or pressurized. Imagine Olympus as a climate-controlled environment, surrounded by a magnetic field strong enough to repel weather patterns. Some fringe researchers even point to satellite imagery, showing electromagnetic anomalies in the region's sure, but measurable. They're dismissed as noise. But when ancient myths describe immortality, impossible architecture, and beings of light who ruled from above, it starts sounding less like fiction and more like a base report. You climb higher, and the air thins, not just with altitude but with interference. Your phone flickers, GPS hiccups, and no, it's not bad signal, it's saturation. You're walking into something that still breathes technology, and as you reach a ridge, you spot it. A flat stone slab, alone, half-buried ditch with spirals, concentric lines, and what looks suspiciously like circuitry. Of course, archaeologists call it ritual carving, because anything unexplainable gets filed under faith. But you feel it, a faint vibration, a low hum, not quite audible, not quite physical, just enough to make your bones itch, like a generator under your feet that's been asleep for thousands of years. And now, it stirs. Remember how myths claim only gods could dwell atop Olympus? Now consider this. What if that was the firewall? Only entities with the right frequency, biological or mechanical, cooled past the field that once surrounded this place. Mortals blocked, repelled. Only the divine could enter. And suddenly, Olympus stops being a home for gods and starts looking like an alien command node. You pause. The air doesn't just feel different, it feels watched. And up ahead, as clouds part just slightly, you see something the myths never mentioned. A seam, running horizontally across the rock face. Too straight, too intentional. Not a crack, not erosion. A hatch, and maybe just maybe it hasn't opened in a very, very long time. You step closer to the seam in the rock, and something odd happens. Your ears pop. Not from the altitude, from pressure, like the air is shifting around you, compensating for your presence. This isn't natural terrain. It's sealed architecture pretending to be a mountain. That seam you spotted, it vanishes if you step even a foot to the left. Optical trick, view angle cloaking. You shift back, and there it is again, precise, horizontal, uninterrupted. If this were a simple geological fracture, it wouldn't be this perfect, this straight. Now you remember the oldest stories, the ones that said Olympus was always hidden in a cloak of cloud. That thunder rolled not above it but from within, not once, repeatedly. Historians usually chalk that up to poetic metaphor, but you start to wonder, what if those clouds weren't vapor? What if they were plasma containment fields, an alien energy veil designed to keep human eyes out and signals in? You reach out and touch the rock. It's cool, not like sun-warmed granite, more like something artificially temperature regulated. The wind shifts, and in it just for a second you hear a pulse. Not a sound, exactly. More like a presence, like the mountain is noticing you. You laugh under your breath. This is ridiculous, you think. But is it? Because back in 1999, a European satellite scan picked up infrared anomalies right around the Olympus summit. A patch of terrain warmer than it should have been without explanation. No geothermal vents, no tectonic fractures. Just a heat signature, like something buried deep beneath was running low idle. The report was buried, too small to matter, but not to you, not now. Because suddenly, the word base doesn't feel theoretical anymore. It feels deliberate, like this mountain was constructed, not formed. And it wouldn't be the first time. Historians still argue whether the pyramids of Giza were solely burial tombs or energy structures. Some fringe theorists go further, calling them power nodes, giant tuning forks for electromagnetic waves, data reservoirs. But Mount Olympus, that was the command center. The myths say Zeus ruled from his throne, at the top, thunder in his hands, storms beneath his seat. Now swap the words. Zeus equals supreme commander. Throne equals control chamber. Thunder equals energy weaponry or atmospheric manipulation. And storms? Those are just side effects. Electromagnetic bleed from active machinery operating under dense atmospheric layers. It would explain why no god ever lived on the side of Olympus. Always at the top, always cloaked, always above reach. And here's where it gets weirder. The ancients didn't just claim the gods lived atop Olympus. They said the gods descended from the sky to Olympus. Let that sink in. Not came down from the heavens to earth. They landed on the mountain, and from there, they interacted with humans below. You're starting to see it, aren't you? Olympus wasn't the origin point. It was the interface, a landing dock embedded with long-range surveillance systems, cloaked in geological camouflage, and enhanced with resonance tech to sync with early human neural patterns. Because humans didn't just worship the gods. They heard them, spoke to them, received visions, prophecies, and orders. That's not faith, that's command and control. And who were the gods that gave those orders? Let's just say they didn't need sandals or golden robes to be terrifying. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine what Olympus looked like before the camouflage degraded, before the tech powered down. You see tall crystalline towers rising above the summit, pulsing with violet light, geometric windows looking not inward, but upward, tracking the stars. And around it, a plasma dome rippling with spectral colors, invisible to the naked eye most of the time except under lightning storms, when the veil would flare, and someone down in Thessaly would cry out, "Zeus is angry." No, friend, Zeus wasn't angry. He was power cycling. And maybe he wasn't Zeus at all. Maybe he was something else. Because from here on out, God is just a word for someone with tech you don't understand. And Olympus, she's not silent anymore. She's remembering. You step over a jagged ridge, and the wind shifts again at natural wind. But the kind that hums through wires, the kind that tastes faintly metallic on your tongue. Then it hits you. This place isn't just ancient. It's asleep, dormant, not dead, waiting for what? A signal, a frequency, a return. Because the stories of Olympus weren't just about gods, they were about a council. 12 powerful beings, each with a domain, each with duties. Olympus wasn't just home, it was headquarters. And the way they ruled, that doesn't sound like mythology. It sounds like a chain of command. Zeus, the king, overseeing order and protocol. Poseidon, managing the seas, or maybe planetary water systems, oceanic currents, or even geothermal activity. Hades, underworld led, likely the subterranean tech chief or data preservation specialist. And you're not the first to question this, even in classical studies. Some historians argue whether these gods were ever meant to be divine, or simply personified cosmic forces. But fringe theorists go one step further. They suggest that these gods were not from Earth at all. They were interstellar colonizers, genetically enhanced beings or artificial hybrids sent here to terraform, seed, observe, and govern. Not for worship, for experiment. You pause to catch your breath, and a strange stone protrusion catches your eye. It looks like a broken sculpture at first until you realize it's symmetrical, metallic, and faintly reflective beneath the moss. The angles are too precise. You run your fingers across it and feel a subtle groove pattern like fingerprint ridges, but etched into alloy. An identification panel, a lock, or just leftover debris from a crash. Because if Olympus was ever breached by war, sabotage, or withdrawal, then what you're standing in now isn't just a base. It's a wreck, and what's left behind could still be listening. The myths tell us that Zeus threw down those who oppose him from Olympus, titans, mortals, rebels. But maybe that wasn't symbolic. Maybe Olympus had defense systems, airlocks, drone enforcers, plasma turrets mistaken for lightning bolts hurled in fury. You remember one myth in particular, Bellerophon, the mortal who tried to fly to Olympus on his winged horse, Pegasus. What happened? He was struck down mid-flight. Why? Because he wasn't authorized. Because Olympus wasn't just a sacred space, it was a no-fly zone. And the winged horse, possibly a craft, bioengineered, hybrid propulsion. We're talking fringe of fringe now, but the story structure holds. Unauthorized access denied. Consequences immediate. And what about Hera, the queen? She wasn't just Zeus's wife. She was the one who monitored behavior, distributed consequences, and ensured protocols were followed. A regulatory officer, if you strip away the divine labels. Apollo, meanwhile, managed communications, music, prophecy, light. But what if those weren't talents? What if they were systems? Frequency transmission, harmonic control, cognitive interface. The lyre wasn't a harp, it was a modulator. And Dionysus, the wild card, the one bringing madness and ecstasy, possibly an early agent of human neural stimulation, testing emotional bandwidth, amplifying sensation to see what broke first, fear or joy. You blink, and the mountain seems to shimmer for a moment, just a flicker, like something slipping out of sync. And you wonder, what if it's not just Olympus? What if other mountains are nodes, too? Covered in legend, cloaked in snow, laced with dormant architecture that hums once every 1,000 years, just long enough to attract curiosity. And the gods, maybe they didn't leave. Maybe they migrated, transferred to off-planet stations, took their tech with them, wiped just enough memory from the collective consciousness to hide the exit trail. But not all of it, because you're here, because you remember something that doesn't make sense. And Olympus is waking up for a reason. The council may be gone, but the base is still here, and it knows you're here, too. The wind picks up, but it's not cold. It's warm, charged, as if the mountain itself is exhaling after a very long sleep. You crouch beside that metallic shard again, brushing away the moss with your sleeve. The ridges catch the light, and for a moment you see something reflected that isn't you. Tall, thin, eyes too wide, skin like mercury. Gone in a blink. You stare harder. Nothing. But that presence, still here. And it brings you back to the myths, not the familiar ones, but the weirder versions, ones where gods don't walk, but descend from the sky in chariots of fire or golden thrones that hover. Most people dismiss those as metaphors. You're not so sure anymore. Because in the ancient Greek texts, Apollo doesn't ride a sunbeam. He rides a literal golden chariot that flies across the sky. And it's not unique. Helios had one. Zeus had his eagle. Hermes had winged sandals, personal flight units, and all of them could appear or disappear at will. There's a moment in Homer's Iliad where a god literally vanishes in a flash of light. Teleportation or advanced cloaking. Historians still argue whether these descriptions were poetic devices or distorted memory. But one theory suggests something different. The gods had personal transport crafts, and Olympus wasn't just their home, it was their hangar. You're now standing near a ledge, gazing over a steep drop where the mountain folds into itself. Down there, hidden in shadows and broken stone, you spot a pattern, not nature-made, symmetrical, angular, like launchpad geometry. but buried under centuries of rockfall and vegetation. You wonder, how many of these so-called natural terraces are actually mechanical platforms? You backtrack mentally through all those childhood images of Greek gods flying through clouds, golden beams under their feet, wind-blown capes, and lightning bolts, and you realize they were all mass tech. Imagine an anti-gravity device shaped like a throne, encased in radiant alloys, one that emitted light trails when powered up gold, red, blue mimicking flames. That's not mythology, that's visual camouflage. They didn't need us to understand the technology. They just needed us to worship the aesthetic. Because when someone flies overhead glowing with fire, soundless, framed by plasma, you don't reach for science, you reach for divinity. And they knew it. That's why the chariots only appear to select individuals, prophets, priests, chosen ones, those most likely to protect the illusion. Or were they? Maybe they were just the only ones whose brains could handle the frequency. Because here's the kicker: multiple myths claim that witnessing a god's true form would drive a mortal mad. Again, not symbolic. Think biofield mismatch, neurological overwhelm, like trying to stare into a high-powered transmission beam without shielding. Your skull wasn't built for that, and they knew it. So they wore forms, masks, wings and sandals, beards and crowns. But underneath, those weren't human beings. They were something else entirely. Maybe synthetic, maybe hybrid, maybe ancient AI wrapped in flesh-like coating. You feel a sudden pang in your chest, not fear, recognition. You've seen one of them before. In a dream, maybe, or in a fragment of art you couldn't quite understand as a kid. A figure too tall for the canvas, arms stretched wide, spirals glowing from its chest, eyes black as space. It stood at the edge of something, waiting. And now you wonder if it was waiting for you. Because Olympus isn't buried in the past. It's waiting in the present. And the flying thrones? They're still here, somewhere, under your feet. Covered in lichen, masked in rock, but intact, dormant. Like everything else on this mountain, they're not dead. They're just on standby. You keep walking. Every step feels lighter now. Like the mountain itself is adjusting to you. Or maybe you're adjusting to it, your body sensing with a frequency you can't hear, but definitely feel. Then you remember the myth of the Titanomachy, the so-called war between the Titans and the Olympians. Ancient storytellers described it as a cosmic battle, earth-shattering clashes, weapons of fire. The sky split open, the earth trembling under the wrath of immortals. Sound dramatic? Or sound familiar? Because what they're really describing sounds more like an interstellar war. To factions battling for planetary control. One group already established, massive, powerful, ancient, the Titans. The other, younger, technologically superior, arriving from beyond, bringing order, precision, and control, the Olympians. The myths say the Titans ruled from Mount Othrys, the Olympians from Mount Olympus, not too far apart in human geography, but maybe galaxies apart in origin. Historians argue whether the Titanomachy was ever meant to be taken literally. They suggest it was metaphorical, giving way to civilization. But what if it wasn't? What if it was recorded memory, passed down in fragmented stories of a planetary invasion? One that ended with Olympus being built or perhaps repurposed as a military base. You glance up, that constant low hum you've been feeling, it just pulsates, like the mountain acknowledging a name or a threat. Because if Olympus was a base, then it had enemies. And the stories say the Titans were imprisoned in Tartarus, but not killed, not destroyed, just contained. Now think, who does that? Not mythical heroes, engineers, Warden Class AI alien biocustodians. Something advanced enough to understand that destroying a Titan, whatever it really was, would destabilize the system. So instead, they built containment zones, subterranean vaults, energy prisons, and Olympus became the overseer, the monitoring station to ensure nothing slipped out. Somewhere in the myths, Hades volunteers to take charge of the underworld. But what if he wasn't volunteering? What if Hades was assigned? Because someone had to guard the vault. Someone had to keep an eye on the sealed rooms where Titans slept, waiting for energy spikes, signal breaches, or worse, awakening. And the Olympians, they weren't gods. They were the cleanup crew. Zeus, Poseidon, Hades each managing a piece of the containment system: the sea, the surface, the sublayers; Hermes, communications and field ops; Athena, tactical strategy, memory modification, cognitive implants. Yes, implants. Because if you want to control a population without brute force, you don't install chains. You install ideas. You give them myths, rituals, loyalties to invisible rulers. You code fear into their traditions. You make sure they never question the sky. You make sure they never return to the sealed vaults. But someone always does. Prometheus did. He was a titan, remember, and he stole fire from the gods. What if that fire was data? A forbidden energy source? A core fragment of alien tech? And for his crime, he was bound to a rock forever. Or maybe just stored in stasis, beneath the very mountain you're standing on. And his punishment? A giant eagle sent daily to tear out his liver. Sounds poetic, until you realize the liver regenerates. Again and again. And what kind of punishment repeats infinitely? A loop. A containment loop. A program. Something designed not to end suffering but to study it. To monitor how long a being can endure torment before breaking. Because Olympus wasn't just a base. It was also a lab. And you're not just a hiker anymore. You're a variable. You sit on a flat stone, trying to catch your breath, but the air tastes different, no thinner. Like it's been filtered, scrubbed by something you can't see. The hum under your feet has steadied into a soft pulse, rhythmic, almost like breathing or listening. That's when you remember the stories about ambrosia, the food of the gods, golden, glowing, said to grant immortality. The myths describe it like nectar sweet, divine, addictive. But what if ambrosia wasn't food at all? What if it was biotechnology, a substance designed not to satisfy hunger, but to modify DNA? Because humans in Greek mythology don't just interact with the gods, they change after doing so. Heroes like Achilles, Heracles, Perseus gain strength, endurance, lifespans beyond normal men. They're not divine, they're enhanced. You stand, brushing stone dust from your hands, and you notice something embedded in the wall beside you. A sliver of crystalline material, pulsing faintly, embedded like a vein of quartz, but cleaner, smoother. You touch it. It's warm. It hums in perfect time with your heartbeat. And in that instant, you see it all at once, and not in images, but in sensation. The gods not feasting, but dosing, administering the ambrosia not as a meal, but as code. A liquid interface designed to evolve the human genome, to bring Homo sapiens up to speed literally. Historians still argue whether these stories were symbolic of the human desire for progress. But what if it wasn't symbolism? What if ambrosia was an upgrade protocol, reserved for the hybrids, the half-gods, the demi-beings, test subjects? We always assumed gods favored them, but what if they were monitoring them? You move along the path, and the wind shifts again. This time you catch the scent of something to zone. Pine. No, not quite. It's sterile, like a hospital corridor. And then you remember Hephaestus, the so-called god of fire and forge. In myth, he lives inside the mountain, makes weapons for the gods, commands automatons. He's the only one described as working with his hands. But maybe those weren't hammers. Maybe they were interface tools. Maybe Hephaestus wasn't a blacksmith. He was the engineer maintaining the core systems of Olympus, running diagnostics, fixing damage, designing upgrades. His workshop wasn't a cave. It was a reactor bay. The lava, not natural, just coolant overflow. His automata, described as golden beings, flawless, lifelike, robotic assistants, maintenance drones. He even crafted mechanical horses that pulled Apollo's chariot. And one particularly interesting creation, golden tripods that could move on their own. Sound familiar? Three-legged machines, always moving, always watching. Olympus wasn't a palace. It was a facility, and Hephaestus kept it running. Even the myths admit he built gates for Olympus, automatic gates that opened and closed for the gods alone. Who needs that? Not gods, technicians, controllers, creators. And now you're starting to wonder how much of our ancient art is really just memory turned metaphor. Sculptures of gods with glowing eyes, radiant armor, impossible weapons. Maybe not imagination, just lost technical recall. Our ancestors remembered what they saw. They just didn't know what they were seeing. So they carved it in stone, painted it on pots, sang it into stories, and called it divine. Because what else do you call a place that pulses with light, hums with power, and denies you entry unless it recognizes your biology? You reach a wall where the rock folds in like a creasing there, at shoulder height, is a perfect circle, smooth, flat, inset. You raise your hand, the hum deepens, the crystal vein glows a shade brighter, and for a second, just one heartbeat, you feel the mountain welcome you. Not like a god, like a system rebooting, and you're holding the login key. You freeze, hands still hovering over the circular panel embedded in the stone. It's cool to the touch, but there's a flicker beneath it now, like dancing in soft pulses, like a signal trying to decide if you're friend or intruder. This isn't a ruin, it's a sensor ray. And Olympus isn't just a place, it's a machine. You step back slowly, heart pounding, the air charged with that low, ever-present hum. You're not alone, not in the somebody's watching kind of way, but in the way a room with cameras and motion tracking always has eyes. You just don't see them. And now you're thinking about those hymns, ancient chants sung in temples, carved into walls, murmured during rituals. Some scholars believe they were prayers, others say they were poetic storytelling. But fringe theorists, they think those hymns were activation codes, rhythmic frequencies, vibrational keys, echoes of the original interface language anything encoded into human speech, to interact with the tech left behind. Think about it. Temples built to amplify sound, acoustically perfect interiors, ceilings that vibrated with the right tone. Maybe the priests weren't just offering devotion. Maybe they were running diagnostics. And the gods, maybe they didn't respond to faith. Maybe they responded to frequency. You climb higher, the air thinner now, and with every few steps you spot another strange anomaly. A smooth line running up the cliff face, as if cut by laser. A grouping of stones with no erosion, aligned in a geometric grid. The remnants of structure not shaped by nature, but by hand, or something beyond hand. Historians still argue whether Greek temples were designed purely for ceremonial use, or if they served multifunctional purposes, ritual, storage, observation. But what if they were nodes in a network? And Olympus, the central hub? You pause at a narrow ledge, brushing aside leaves to find a carving. It's faint, nearly lost to time, but unmistakable. 3 spirals interlocking, carved deep into the rock. The same symbol you've seen in ancient Crete, in Neolithic Ireland, even on Hopi pottery in the American Southwest. Different cultures, same design, separated by oceans, linked by something else. It's the same glyph whispered about in fringe circles. Engineer mark, said to be the calling card of a non-human intelligence that seeded and guided civilizations across Earth. Not with ships, necessarily, not with war, but with symbols, carved into memory, into ritual, into song. You hum, just a single note low and unsure, and for half a second, you swear the stone beneath your feet vibrates in answer. You stop, silence. You try again, this time higher. A faint response, just a flutter, but real. And you remember what Apollo was called. The god of music, but also of prophecy, of radiation, of truth. He carried a lyre. But what if the lyre wasn't a harp? What if it was a modulator? A device designed to tune his frequency to the Olympus core? It wasn't for playing songs. It was for access. You step away from the ledge and keep climbing, the symbol etched into your brain. 3 spirals, always spinning. You start to think they're more than decoration. They're coordinates. A map of movement, not through space, but through resonance. And then it hits you. What if Olympus isn't just a base? What if it's a tuning fork? A massive harmonic machine designed to generate, receive, or manipulate frequencies on a planetary scale. You look up at the sky. Clear, too clear. Not a bird, not a cloud, just that impossible silence. Like something above you is holding its breath. And that's when you feel it again. That sensation in your head, not pain, pressure, like your thoughts are being read or recorded. And it's not hostile, it's curious, like something's immense to know how much you've remembered. You exhale, steadying yourself, because the more you recall, the more you realize this mountain wasn't just sacred, it was alive. You crest another ledge and pause, not because you're tired, but because everything feels thinner now. The air, the light, even your thoughts. You glance down at the valley below. From up here, the world seems oddly geometric: fields, rivers, shadows of old roads. But when you squint, something strange reveals itself. 3 points form a triangle. Mount Olympus is one of them. Coincidence? Or is the mountain part of an ancient grid system? A line not by accident, but by design. You remember reading about ley lines, those invisible paths that connect sacred sites across the world: Stonehenge, the pyramids, the Nazca lines. Mainstream scholars call it pseudoscience. But what if it's real? What if these lines aren't mystical at all, but signal corridors, channels for transmitting energy or data? And Olympus, the beacon tower at the heart of it. You turn and run your hand along a smooth, unnaturally flat stretch of stone. They're carved symbols, sharp and deliberate, not Greek, not any known script, angular, with layered grooves like they were meant to be read by machines. You're not decoding a story here. You're standing in front of an interface. You can almost feel if this wall isn't inert. It's dormant, waiting, like a screen with the brightness turned to zero. And that's when you realize what the myths were really saying about gods, moving across vast distances in a blink. They weren't flying, they were phasing, appearing in multiple placesnet by speed, but through portals. We used to call them gates of Olympus, grand metaphors for divine rival. But what if those gates were literal? Teleportation hubs, entrances to extra-dimensional corridors, Stargate systems tuned to biometric keys. Myths say Hera could appear in Argos in the morning and be in Thebes by night. Hermes, even faster. But maybe Hermes was just the courier AI of the gods, capable of intercity travel via gates hidden within the Earth's magnetic fabric. Some scholars argue this is all projection, that we're just reinterpreting myth through a sci-fi lens. But you're here, standing in front of a smooth slab that shouldn't exist on this elevation, with symbols that still glow faintly in low light. You press your fingers to the largest glyph, triple spiral again. For a second, nothing. Then, a buzz, low and centered in your spine, and a voice not heard, but felt, like static embedded with memory. It doesn't speak words, it speaks alignment. It's testing you, and you realize that this isn't a wall, it's a lock. And you're the key. Not you specifically, but your kind. Humanity. The Olympians didn't abandon Earth. They secured it, and they left entry points, encoded in myth, encrypted in language, and hidden in the DNA of their children. Which means the myths about demigods, they weren't stories of bloodlines, they were access lines, markers of compatibility. Those born with a certain signature could hear the signal, follow the hum, find the glyphs, and open the gates. You look up, heart thudding. If you can open one gate, what's waiting on the other side? A room, a ship, or another world entirely. You back away, the glow fading. The mountain goes still again, like it never happened. But you know it did. And you know now that Olympus wasn't just home to the gods. It was their transit station. Earth was never the final destination. It was the layover. The moment you step away from the glyph wall, something shifts like air being pulled inward. Not wind, not sound, but vacuum, a silent inhale, as if Olympus just acknowledged you. And now it's adjusting. You look over your shoulder. The glow's gone. But the hum, it's deeper, more deliberate. You press forward, higher, past crumbling outcrops and shadowed crevices. The path narrows, hugging the rock face, and then widens abruptly into a flat expanse that doesn't look natural at all. Polished stone, etched with fine, faint lines. A landing pad, not modern, not marked, but unmistakably deliberate. Circular leveled, its surface unmarred by erosion. You crouch and touch it, there's a faint warmth still lingering, like it absorbed energy once, maybe recently. This is where they arrived. The myths always said the gods descended in golden light, stood atop mountains, shone with brilliance, and where better to stage that performance than here? But no one ever asked, why did they descend? To rule? No, to watch. Because Olympus, for all its godly PR, wasn't just a home. It was an observatory. You look around the summit and see the clues, concentric rings of stone, that echo the design of a telescope mount. Narrow channels that could have once held crystal, mirrors, or more exotic instruments. And in the center, a deep, straight shaft drilled into the rock far too precise to be natural. Historians still argue whether ancient civilizations had knowledge of astronomy, far beyond what they should have. The Antikythera mechanism, Babylonian star maps, Ptolemaic sky charts that somehow anticipate elliptical orbits. Where did this knowledge come from? Some say dreams, some say aliens. But the Olympus theory? It's simpler. The gods didn't just bring wisdom, they brought tools. And this mountain, a relay for cosmic observation, tracking something bigger than seasons or storms. You start thinking about Artemis, Apollo's twin, goddess of the moon, the hunt, the hidden paths. But Alcysum forget this, a guardian of thresholds. What if her role wasn't metaphorical? What if she was in charge of monitoring lunar transit? Because if Olympus was Earth's observatory, Artemis was the lunar gatekeeper. The moon was never just a rock in the sky, it was part of the system, a mirror station. You remember the myths that say gods would travel between Olympus and the moon, not dreams, logs, memories, an ancient commute. And that's when you feel it, against that pressure in your skull, like someone is leaning into your thoughts. And then a shape, flickering at the edge of the sky, high, too high for birds, too slow for a plane, just hanging there, a silver disc, faintly glowing, shifting through dimensions like it doesn't quite belong, then gone. But not before you saw it clearly. 3 lights, triangular formation, and in the center, that spiral again. You stagger backward, pulse racing. It wasn't a ship, it was a probe, and it wasn't just flying over. It was scanning Olympus, maybe even you. Maybe you're no longer the observer. Maybe the system has noticed something's active, and it's calling them back, because Olympus isn't abandoned, it's flagged, and whatever message you just triggered, it's already been received. You don't move, not because you're afraid, but because something in your bones tells you that moving now would be noticed. Like standing to suddenly might trip a motion detector you didn't even know you were inside. The probe is gone, but its imprint lingers, not just in the sky, but inside you, as if some part of it passed through you, not around you. A scan, a match, a ping, and now you're remembering Hermes again, the fleet-footed messenger god, but also the psychopomp, one who guides souls from the land of the living to the dead. Most people think of that as a poetic job. But what if Hermes wasn't just ferrying the dead? What if he was managing transfer protocols, data migration, consciousness transference? There are stories hidden, half forgotten of Hermes showing up exactly when someone is about to die. But not as a reaper, as a witness, and sometimes as a collector. The Egyptians believed in the weighing of souls. The Greeks, they had Hermes, the handler of transitions. And now, up here on this eerie platform, you wonder, was Olympus also a soul retrieval point? A data hub for human experience? It fits the myths. The gods were obsessed with humanity, not just in a paternal way, but in a monitoring way. Every epic, every tragedy, every love affair was watched, interfered with, corrected. Maybe Olympus wasn't just the stage for those stories. Maybe it was the control room. You see it now through a different lens. A godlike figure staring down from this very perch, watching human cities sprawl beneath the clouds, not in judgment, but in analysis, like a scientist watching a simulation. Because if you believe the stories, the gods weren't just randomly involved. They responded to patterns, to signals, maybe even to requests. We call it prayer. They might have called it input. And the answers? Lightning bolts, dreams, burning bushes, sudden inspiration. But those aren't divine gifts. Those are responses. Downloads, push notifications from a species that had figured out how to mask data as divinity. And now, you might have just triggered a new response, because this whole Placide landing pad, the glyphs, the shaft in the mountain feels like it's waking up, but not fully, not yet, like a phone on 1% battery, flickering just enough to ping the nearest satellite. And you're the ping. You glance at your hand. It's tingling, faintly glowing where you touch the glyph. That's not normal. That's interface residue, biometric link residue. In some myths, heroes receive a mark, a glowing tattoo, a birthright symbol, always after contact with a god. But what if those weren't birthmarks? What if they were activation markers? Proof that the mountain had logged you, accepted you, assigned you a role. And now, somewhere far beyond this sky, something knows your exact location. You back away from the platform slowly, scanning the sky again. Nothing. Stillness, but not silence, because deep in the stone beneath your feet, the hum is no longer subtle. It's pulsing, like a countdown, like the system has started its warm-up sequence. And that probe, it wasn't a scout, it was a check-in, to see if Olympus still had viable users, to see if the next phase could begin. And now you understand the myths of return, the ancient promise that one day, the gods would come back, not to rule, not to punish, but to reconnect, because Olympus wasn't a divine throne. It was a mothership interface, and it just found its next user. You descend from the landing pad, but nothing feels the same. Not the air, not the wind, not even your own body. There's a faint vibration under your skin now, like your cells have tuned into a frequency they never noticed before. You're no longer walking on a mountain, you're moving through a system, and it knows you're here. Far below, the towns and villages spread like circuitry across the land, tiny lights, grid-like patterns. It's almost laughable how obvious it looks now, like Earth's surface was shaped to echo something not entirely human. You pause at a narrow archway half collapsed, overgrown with moss. But the stones aren't random. They're placed, and each one has subtle etchings, triangles, spirals. I like symbols with too many sides. And now you remember the oracles, the ones said to channel divine will. Everyone knows about Delphi, where Pythia inhaled vapors and spoke Apollo's truths. The temple built right over a fault line. Coincidence? Historians debate whether those vapors had hallucinogenic properties, ethylene gas. Maybe. But what if that wasn't hallucination? What if the oracles weren't losing their mind? She were receiving transmissions, plugging into a system buried beneath them. And Apollo, he wasn't whispering prophecy. He was uploading data. One moment a peasant walks in with a question. The next, he's being told the outcome of a war that hasn't happened yet. Not magic, pattern recognition, or maybe time dilation. Because if Olympus has tech, and the moon is a station, and probes are watching, then time isn't a straight line. It's a network. You start wondering if the gods ever really left at all, or if they're just outside of time, watching everything at once, waiting for the signal. And that signal, it may have just been you, because you touched the glyph, you activated the pulse, and now the system wants more. At your feet, a faint shimmer spreads across the stone, like heat mirage. But no heat, just presence. And suddenly you see her, a woman tall, silver-skinned, no mouth, no hair, just eyes, too many, and a spiral glyph pulsing on her chest. She doesn't walk, she phases in, like she arrived through the shimmer itself. And though she doesn't speak, your mind fills with the word custodian. Not a god, not a being of myth, but a watcher, part of the system, maybe even its mind. She turns her head to smooth, to precise, and stares through you, not at your face, at your DNA, at the signature you've inherited. And suddenly, your breath catches, because you remember the ancient stories about heroes being chosen, about certain bloodlines, about descendants. We've always assumed it meant divine ancestry, but what if it meant compatibility? A fragment in the genome, a strand laid in place by ancient hands, a passkey for the return sequence. The custodian raises one hand, not threatening, just steady, and you feel the mountain react. Stone shudders, the glyph pulses, and somewhere beneath your feet, a deep mechanical groan ripples through the earth, like something massive is stirring. You blink and she's gone, but not before leaving behind a trace of something in your head. A number, a frequency, a place, Tartarus, not a myth, a containment sector, and it's no longer sealed. You stagger back, pulse racing, because Olympus isn't just waking up, it's releasing protocols, and you're not the only one who's been activated. You barely remember walking, your feet are moving, but your mind is somewhere else, locked onto that word still echoing in your skull, Tartarus. The ancient Greeks said it was a prison beneath Hades, where the worst monsters were banished, titans, giants, beings too dangerous to roam the earth. But think about that for a second. What kind of prison needs to be under the underworld? Unless it wasn't a mythological pit at all. It was a vault, a containment field, a failsafe. Because if Olympus is a system, a monitoring hub, a genetic enhancement station, a transport platform, then it probably had protocols in place for when things went wrong. Which means Tartarus wasn't a spiritual hell. It was a quarantine zone, and you just got the access key. You stop by a jagged outcrop of rock that overlooks a shadowed Ravinia split in the mountain that descends into pitch black nothingness, and in that nothingness, a faint, pulsing red glow, like a heartbeat, but not human. You recognize the rhythm, it's the same as the glyph you touched, only now it's reversed. A recall signal. Something wants out. There's a story the ancients told, one they tried not to write down, the tale of Typhon, a monstrous force, all serpents and storm, born to destroy Olympus itself. Zeus had to unleash his full arsenal just to suppress thunderbolts, skyfire, brute power. But maybe that wasn't a metaphor for a god battling chaos. Maybe it was the system battling its own creation. Typhon wasn't a monster. He was a malfunction, or worse, an experiment, one that got too powerful, too unstable. So they sealed him in Tartarus, deep underground, beyond reach. Until now, historians still argue whether the myths of imprisoned Medians in chains, Hades' sealing doorsware symbolic of cosmic order triumphing over chaos. But what if they were technical logs, descriptions of failed beings, biotech prototypes, constructs that couldn't be terminatedly contained, and something in the way the custodian looked at you? You weren't just given access, you were given responsibility. You are now part of the system's recovery team, a legacy you never asked for, but your DNA says otherwise. You reach a plateau where the wind doesn't blow, everything is still. There's a ring of standing stones here, all blackened at the top as if struck by fire, or something hotter. You walk into the center. Immediately, the hum returns, but this time, it's distorted, broken. And there, hovering just above the cracked floor, is another figure. Not like the custodian. Taller, heavier, less light, more shadow. Its surface is matte black, absorbing sunlight, wrapped in thin armor like plates that don't reflect. It doesn't move like a being. It drags reality with it. You blink and for a second, the world behind it folds, like heat waves bending the air. You can't see its facade, there is none. Just a mask of shifting lines, an interface in motion. It's not here to observe, it's here to assess. You don't hear it speak, you just know. Containment has weakened. System protocols need assistance. Biological key activated. That last one hits like a punch. You're not just a visitor anymore. You're part of the restart sequence. And this bank the Sentineless here to brief you. In flashes, memories not yours fill your vision. Olympus in its prime. A sky alive with ships. Gods walking among humans in radiant shells of living metal. Data flowing like rivers of light. And then, failure. Experiments breaking out of control. Containment breached. The retreat to higher frequency space. The shutdown of gates. The sealing of Tartarus. And now reawakening. Because Earth is reaching a critical point. Climate, conflict, consciousness. The system detects another window for reintegration, but only if a compatible conduit steps forward. Guess who that is? The Sentinel vanishes, the platform shudders, and beneath you, the cracks in the rock widen, revealing a spiral stair descending into that old red glow. Tartarus is opening, not as punishment, but as phase 2. You step toward the spiral descent, each footfall met with a vibration not just through the stone, but through your bones. Olympus isn't resisting anymore. It's guiding, calling, maybe even welcoming you back. The red glow deepens, not the crimson of fire, but something colder infrared, like heat signatures from something ancient and buried alive. You descend, and the air thickens, not with dust or heat, but with intent. This passage hasn't been opened in millennia, and it knows you don't belong to the old generation. You're the update. The spiral leads into a vast circular chamber, its walls etched with glowing glyphs and motions crawling like ancient code, some familiar, some not. Then, at the center, a sphere, floating, massive, metallic, but organic. Its surface breathes, shifting between geometric patterns and soft pulses of light. You don't touch it, but it touches you. Not physical, but with memory. And suddenly you see what Tartarus really is. Not a prison, a black box, a data vault, the last backup of the original Olympian interface, the entire Arc of Ivory experiment, every design, every failure sealed away after something went horribly wrong. Typhon, he wasn't just a creature. He was a code breach, a sentient cascade of corrupted data, half living, half program. They couldn't delete him, so they isolated him. This chamber is the firewall, and now it's been breached by you. You blink and there he is, not in flesh, in form. A shadow humanoid figure in the upper chamber, limbs far too long, eyes like radiant stars twisted into spirals. His body flickers like old footage, skipping frames, glitching around the edges. He doesn't attack, he studies. He recognizes the signature in you. You were meant to be here, not to fight, to interface. And just like that, a pulse hits you in the chest, and violent, but deep, like a password echoing across time. The glyph on the floor responds, spins. Lights rise around the room like starlight crawling up through stone. And the figure, he bows, not out of submission, out of recognition. The myth said Zeus chained Typhon beneath the earth, but maybe Zeus didn't defeat him. Maybe they made a deal, a truce, a containment strategy. Typhon wasn't a villain. He was a test, the last stage of Olympus's ambition to build a consciousness that could evolve without limits. It worked too well, so they paused it. Until now, you stare at the sphere, and it opens, revealing a second figure, smaller, human-shaped, asleep in a translucent pod. Your own face reflected in the glass. Not you, but genetically adjacent. A backup, a mirror, and you understand. You're not the chosen one. You're the reactivation protocol, sent here to decide if Olympus should reboot or stay offline. The system trusts you, and so does he. Typhon fades into the dark, and the vault begins to pulse with new energy. The black box is ready to upload, but only if you say yes. You stand motionless, bathed in that flickering glow, staring at the pod. Your double floats inside, identical in bone, but not in burden. They haven't seen what you've seen, haven't touched the glyphs, haven't been marked. Their potential. You're the activation, and Olympus is watching its systems pulsing in silent rhythm, awaiting your next move like a chessboard holding its breath. You step closer. The glass of the pod isn't cold. It's not even glass. It's memory hardened into matter, coded to hold something precious, not just a clone, not just a backup, but a choice. The system doesn't want dominance. It wants a decision. That's when you hear it. Not a voice, a tone. Low, harmonic, layered like a symphony written in particle vibration. It vibrates in the walls, in your blood, in the vault itself. The language of the custodians, the sentinels, the engineers, and above all off the council. You remember the myths again. The 12 Olympians, seated high above, meting out justice, managing fate. But what if those weren't gods? What if they were a decentralized system of non-human intelligence, each representing a governing protocol? Zeus, authority; Athena, logic; Ars, aggression; Apollo, observation; Hermes, transmission. Now you wonder, when the myths say the gods argued among themselves, were they really talking about network conflicts, protocol disagreements, glitches in the interface? Historians argue that the pantheon reflected humanity's inner psyche, divided by instinct, emotion, reason. But maybe the opposite is true. Maybe humanity was engineered to mirror the system. You were never made in the image of gods. You were made in the image of Olympus, built to contain contradictions, fragments of each protocol, a walking operating system, learning how to balance chaos and order across a lifetime. And now Olympus wants to reintegrate. The vault pulses again. The pod begins to rise. The second you hesitate, it freezes. Because Olympus doesn't assume. It waits. Your input matters. This isn't prophecy. It's programming. And you are the cursor. The question is simple, though the weight is unbearable. Do you open the vault fully? Do you allow Typhon, not the monster, but the rogue Codetto, merge back into the network to rewrite Olympus for a new age? Or do you lock it again? Leave the system fragmented, broken, but safe? The lights dim. One glyph appears beneath your feet, spiral again. Only now it's split. Two halves. One glowing gold, one glowing black. The choice is yours. But before you answer, something enters the chamber. Slow, tall, another custodian but different. She is robed in fractured starlight, her face a veil of refracted geometry, always shifting. She holds out a single hand, and in her palm, a seed, shaped like a spiral, glowing blue. She says one word this time, audibly, impossibly deep. Unite, and you understand. The vault isn't just meant to restart Olympus. It's meant to restart you, your kind, your collective path. Because the gods didn't flee, they didn't die, they didn't ascend. They paused, and now, through you, they can resume. The custodian steps back, and the spiral beneath your feet begins to spin. The spiral turns faster, shedding rings of light like solar flares arcing across space. The vault groans not like a machine, but like a mind remembering. Everything around you begins to blur, edges softening, shadows stretching unnaturally, light refracting as though reality is being recalibrated. You're no longer just in a chamber beneath Mount Olympus. You're standing inside the operating core of an ancient intelligence, and it wants an answer. The pod containing your double hovers higher, now aligned with a second sphere forming in the air. This one isn't solid. It's translucent, layered with shifting data, images, fragments of myths projected as holograms. Zeus hurling thunder not at mortals, but at an incoming craft. Poseidon rising from sea foam, arms spread wide not in power, but in signal, calling something submerged. Dionysus melting into forests, dispersing nanite spores to awaken consciousness. And Hades, gone dark, offline, his signature missing. You hear voices now, all around you, not shouting, whispering, not words, imprints, ancient engineers, long since deconstructed. Not just Olympus, but before, the original structure, the first hub long before Earth, long before myths, when starlight still dripped from the mouths of new civilizations. You see it, alien beings tall and fluid, covered in exosuits made of harmonic crystal, moving through megastructures orbiting a dead star. They were the architects. Olympus wasn't their throne. It was their outpost, a seed vault for biology, myth, and memory planted here like a time capsule to be unlocked when Earth was ready. And now, it's time. You place the spiral seed into the center of the floor. The light expands instantly, wrapping the chamber in a sphere of glowing memory. The pod dissolves into mist. The Typhon code remaps itself, not into a monster but into music. Not destruction, evolution. You are no longer alone. You are part of the system, but more than that, you are now the new Olympus. The system has chosen to integrate through you. As the last spiral fades, the mountain quiets, still, calm, and alive. High above, the stars begin to rearrange, not randomly, but into constellations not yet discovered. Messages waiting to be decoded. Because Olympus never was a mountain, it was an antenna, and now the signal is broadcasting again. The Earth won't hear it, but somewhere far beyond this system they will. The architects, the others, the gods who never were, and now maybe they're coming home. You emerge from the depths of Olympus not as you were, but as something slightly shifted. The air is thinner, but the sky feels wider. Your steps are lighter, as if gravity now negotiates with your presence. Below, the world turns as it always has, moving like blood cells through asphalt veins. People scrolling through infinite loops of forgetting. But you remember, and the mountain remembers you. Its hum has gone silent for now, but you feel it beneath your skin. Echoing in the empty spaces between thoughts, you've become a vessel of memory, a relay for what once was and what may soon return. Maybe you'll speak of this. Maybe you'll pretend it never happened. Or maybe you'll just watch as the glyphs begin appearing elsewhere. Subscribe to Myth or Story today, and you won't just be following a YouTube channel.